In today's video, I'm going to be answering that age-old question: what do you do when vintage computer parts no longer work or go missing, like this Amiga with no mouse? Can I get it working again with a completely incompatible PC mouse like this one? First, through finding a project that solves the problem, buying the PCB and relevant parts, soldering it all together, programming the PIC chip, encasing it in heat shrink tubing, and finally, of course, giving it a good test with various PC mice. Somehow, Amigas in various states of disrepair keep falling into my lap, and fixing those and bringing them back to life is reflected in some of the videos I share here on YouTube. But one thing I've found is that they very rarely come with all the parts, especially mice. And whilst I could just go online and order a replacement one, like the original tank mouse I've got here, the cost these sell for nowadays makes it quite an expensive option. So when donating these repaired machines to friends and family, I went off looking for a cheaper alternative replacement mouse to the original tank one. And that's when I found this PS2 to Amiga adapter project on the community project pages at PCB Way. And this one by C64 Istanbul is the one I'm going to be building today. So why, you might ask, am I making these when you can just buy them on eBay? And the best way to answer that is, again, cost, as they are, if you have the right equipment, really cheap to make. Let's take the PCB. Ordering from PCB Way couldn't be simpler, as I just have to add the project to the cart, making sure that I have the right, most cost-effective shipping selected, and I find the global standard fast enough for my needs. And a little tip I've found to make sure that I'm getting the most for my money is to increase the quantity of the PCBs ordered to see how many I can get without increasing the original price. Which I found with this project, you can get 15 boards for the same price you would have paid for 5. So obviously I'm going for the 15. So if we just look over here on the right, sans PayPal fees, I will get 15 boards for $9.34 delivered to my door. So that's around 62 cents each. And just over a week later, the PCBs were delivered, as you can see here, along with the rest of the components I needed for this project that I got from a very popular Chinese website, and I'll let you guess which one that is. And I will say most of the parts I did buy in bulk, usually 10 pieces at a time, to help bring down the cost. So if we just quickly run through the components needed to build one of these adapters, we can see how much it actually costs to make one. Firstly, obviously, we need the PCB, then an 18-pin dip socket, next a female DB9 connector, and a 6-pin right-angled PS2 socket, a rather inexpensive 100 nanofarad ceramic capacitor, this PIC 16F628A chip, and lastly some 22mm heat shrink tubing, with the total coming in for each adapter to around $3.31 or £2.52 at today's exchange rate, which you have to admit is a lot cheaper than the £10 to £15 I would have paid if I bought one from eBay. But moving on, now we know all the parts and costings, let's get to building one. So before we get to soldering everything together, I first need to do one thing, and that is to remove this metal surrounding from the DB9 connector so that it looks more like this one that I prepared earlier. And why do this, you might ask? Well, I discovered that whilst with the metal shield on it, it fits fine into the ports on the rear of a regular A500 like the one I've got back here, or if I just pick up the 1200 to demonstrate, it also fits perfectly into the ports on the back of here as well. But if I just put this one down and grab this A600 here, you can see that the ports on this model are found recessed on the side, making it impossible to insert with the metal surround on it. And for that very reason, I prefer to remove it to make the adapter fully interchangeable between models, which can be easily done using some metal snips like the ones I've got here. So with that said, let's get it removed. Like I say, it's pretty easy to do with the right tool. For myself, as I don't have the strength to do this with one hand, I use a tip my dad taught me and cut it inside a plastic bag to catch anything before it flies off to never be found again. And once both sides are done, we just need to separate the two metal parts from the plastic body. Again, helps if you've got fingernails to do this, which, as quite a few people keep pointing out to me, I do not. Anyway, there you have it, it's finally apart, and that's how you remove the metal surround. Okay, now that job is done, I've got the rest of the parts I need here on the bench, so we can move on to soldering it all together. And we're going to start first with this, the 18-pin dip socket. First, we need to check the IC orientation, and on this PCB, the silkscreen shows us which way it goes with the standard semicircle notch graphic that you can see here. So looking at the notch on my dip socket, I'm just going to make sure when inserting this into the PCB that it's pointing in the same direction like this. Okay, so I've got my soldering iron on and set to 350 degrees C, and I've also got my extractor fan on as well. And I've added a little bit of flux to make it a bit easier on the opposing corners, as I do like to solder those first, as I find it helps to get everything lined up and flush. So I'll grab my soldering iron here, and I'll just start by soldering this top corner like that, and I'll do the bottom corner here like that. And if I just move my solder to one side, I can use my soldering iron here to add a little bit of heat to that corner and just press down to make sure it's flush. And I'll do the other corner as well. Let me just turn that around. There we go, just adding a little bit of pressure, see if it needs pushing down, it will do. And then put the soldering iron down. If I just look underneath, you should be able to see on the camera that looks pretty flush to me. So now I can get the rest of these pins soldered. Okay, now that socket is all soldered, I've just given the board a quick clean with some IPA and a toothbrush to remove any excess flux. So now we can move on to soldering the next part, which is the DB9 connector that I prepared earlier. Now, to position the DB9 connector, I'm just sliding the connector's top row of 5 pins over the 5 pads on the PCB like this. And if I then flip it over, you can see the other row of 4 pins lines up with the other 4 pads. And finally, to make life a little easier when soldering, I'm going to keep the board with the dip socket facing down like you can see here, which conveniently, with a little bit of extra blue tack under the connector, keeps it nice and level. So now that's all ready, I'm just going to add a little flux so that we can get it soldered. And whilst I start soldering this, it's worth mentioning I did, before I started, go back and add some extra blue tack on the adjacent side of the PCB to help it keep it level and in place. It's just that even though it's hard to show here on video, you really want the DB9 port to be as horizontal as possible with the PCB, as you don't want a wonky adapter. And talking of keeping things level, would love to hear in the comments below recommendations on other methods you've seen or used to hold PCBs and keep parts in place. Anyway, as you just saw, once the first rows of pins are soldered, I just flipped the board over, removed and replaced loosely the blue tag to hold, as the already soldered pins should keep everything level when soldering the pins on this side. Okay, so now we've got the DB9 connector all nicely soldered onto the board, we can finally move on to soldering the last two items, which are these two here, the PS2 female socket and the 100 nanofarad ceramic capacitor. Now, if we first take the PS2 socket, I just need to orientate the board the right way so the dip socket is facing us. Then I just need to line up the pins, which can only go one way, like that, and I'm just using a little force to click it into place, as it's got this, and correct me if I'm describing this wrong, push fit pin. And now that that's done, I'm just going to grab my pliers here and use them to bend back these two tabs that you can see here to secure it fully to the board. So that PS2 connector is now all ready for soldering. But before we do that, we just need to insert the capacitor, which is as simple as it sounds, and to help, I've already pre-bent the pins, so it should just slide into the PCB like this. So now we've got both of those final components placed and ready to solder in the board. I'm just going to get them quickly soldered and I'll be straight back for the next fun step, programming the PIC chip. I'm back, and I will say, as a hobbyist and not a professional, I'm pretty chuffed on how the soldering on this turned out. Definitely feel like I'm getting better the more that I solder. Which leads me to a question I often get asked, that is, how did I learn to solder and what's the best way to learn? And for me, I would just say find a project and practice, but I'm sure there is better advice out there. So for those soldering experts watching this, if you have any tips on how a newbie should start and what equipment they should get, then definitely let everyone know by leaving a comment below. Anyway, now it's time to move on to the next step, programming one of these PIC chips. But just before we do, I can't think of a better time to introduce, and rather aptly given where I bought the PCBs from, which is today's video sponsor, PCBWay, who have been making high quality PCBs now for over 10 years through their low cost, quick turnaround fabrication services, and have recently expanded their services to include injection molding, CNC machining, and 3D printing to help bring your projects to life. They also have a great community that I use a lot, full of retro projects that can be easily browsed and ordered, like the one I'm building today. So if interested in finding out more, please check out the link to PCBWay.com down in the description below. Okay, now that's done, we can move on to programming the PIC chip, which probably sounds, if you've never done it before, a lot more complicated than it actually is to do. And also, you might be wondering, why are we programming a chip? Well, the best way to summarize it would be to say the code we write to it is the brains that converts the movement and clicks from a PS2 mouse to something the Amiga understands, basically emulating an Amiga mouse. So to do this, you just need to get a simple programmer like the universal one I have here, which I've found to be an invaluable piece of kit, especially with working on vintage hardware. So if you haven't got one, it's well worth the investment. And to use this one, as I say, it's really simple, as you just need to fire up the supplied application XG Pro. And now that's loaded up, I just need to find the chip that we're going to be programming from the built-in database. And to do that, I can just click on Select IC up here and then type in the chip name. And whilst I type this in, I'm just going to preempt the questions I always get asked about what keyboard I'm using. And this keyboard today is the 8BitDo Xbox Retro keyboard. And as I always say, for those interested, I will leave a link for this in the description, but I've just typed that in, and the chip I'm using is the PIC16F628A, and the type I've got is a DIP18, which is already selected, so I can just confirm that by clicking select down here. So now I've got the right chip selected, I just need to load up the hex file that we're going to use to program it. And if I just show you here, I've already downloaded the hex file from the mouse converter page on the PCBWay website. If I just scroll all the way down to the bottom here, you can see where I got the hex file from. And as always, I will leave a link to this page and everything else in the description. But if we just go back to loading it here, I can just click load and then browse, and I've conveniently saved the file to my desktop, so I can just open it here, click OK, and now that's all ready for programming. So all that's left to do now is to insert a blank PIC chip into the programmer so that we can program it. And looking at the programmer, we can see the orientation it needs to go with that half circle symbol again. So if I just lift the little lever up here and looking for the notch on the chip, which is here, making sure it's going in the same direction, I can just pop it in like this, and once in, it just needs locking into place by pulling the lever back down. Now back to the software, all I need to do is click the program button up here and click program again, and if everything goes to plan, just wait a few seconds. And that chip is now programmed, ready for insertion into the adapter we just made for testing. And to do that, it's as simple as taking the chip out of the programmer and once again making sure it's orientated the right way by looking at the notch. So we have the notch on this side here, which matches the notch on this side of the socket on the adapter. Then I can just line it up and press it down like this. Okay, just before I show myself entombing this newly made adapter in some protective heat shrink tubing, we're gonna first give it a quick test, as this is good practice to check if the chip was programmed correctly, as I don't really want to have to cut off the tubing to do it again. Now, to make testing easy, I've moved all the programming stuff to one side. So the first step is to grab a PS2 mouse, like this one that I know works, and plug it into the PS2 socket on the adapter like this. Now I just need to slide the Amiga forward and get it plugged in to the first joystick port on the back like that. Now if I just quickly push the Amiga back and switch it on, we can finally see if it works. So it's just loading Workbench off of USB through my Gotek, which if you haven't seen, I did a video on installing one of these a while ago. And for those interested in seeing that, I'll leave a link to it in the description. Anyway, it looks like it's loaded and it works as demonstrated by me opening a window here. So there you have it. That's how simple it is to make one working PS2 to Amiga mouse adapter. So moving on, I do want to test this with a couple more mice, like these ones, including a Microsoft optical USB one. But before I do, as promised, there is one final step, and that is to heat shrink tube the adapter to protect it while in use. So let's do that now. Okay, I've got the heat gun set up here and ready to go, and heat shrink tubing wise, I've found 22mm wide to be the best size for this, and I've already cut off 5 centimeters in length, which is about 2 inches, and got it slid over my adapter like you can see here. Now, using my pliers to hold it as it does get very hot, I'm just gonna turn on the heat gun, and it should start shrinking straight away. And while the heat is on, I just need to keep turning it so it gets all of the sides. And that's it, it's done as quickly as that. But as this one needs to cool down in true Blue Peter fashion, and I've always wanted to use this phrase, here is one I made earlier that's already cooled down and ready to go, with all the electronics nicely protected now from accidental touch when handling. So with this one now ready for use, let's go and give it a proper test with some different mice. Okay, now if you were wondering where I got the bikini mouse from that I showed earlier, well, it's from this box that contains my collection of novelty mice, which I hope all of you have a similar collection as well, and if you haven't, then shame on you. Anyway, joking aside, let me know if you want to see me make a future video about some of these wonderful and strange mice in the comments below. But moving on, and like I showed earlier, I also found this older USB optical Microsoft mouse, plus a couple of trackables that I thought would be interesting ones to test to see if the adapter we just made works with USB devices, especially through one of these USB to PS2 adapters that you can see here. So as you can see in the background here, I've already gone ahead and loaded up one of my favourite Amiga games, Lemmings, which as we all know is best played with a mouse. So starting with the Microsoft one I've got here, let's try that first by just unplugging the PS2 mouse that we know works from around the back of the Amiga and plugging this USB Microsoft one straight back in through that adapter I just showed. And yes, as you can see, it's moving, and I can confirm the left button works as I just started a game of Lemmings, which I am gonna pause straight away as I don't want them all to explode when the timer runs out. And to be honest, I will say it does, being optical, feel a lot smoother to use than the original tank mouse, and even that PS2 one I was using earlier, which is probably expected given its newer technology. So ticking that one off the list as working, let's move on to testing one of those trackables, starting first with this Kensington one. So again, let's swap it over while still using the same USB to PS2 adapter and see if it works. Okay, I'm rolling this one, and like you can see, I'm clicking the button as well, but sadly this doesn't seem to want to work. And just to be sure, I'll check the connection, and everything is as it should be. So I think this one just doesn't work, as it is a more modern device that can't switch back to the old PS2 protocol that some of these older USB mice used to do. So let's call this one a bust and move on to see if we have a better luck with the older Microsoft trackable. So let's get it swapped over now. And yep, I've given it a roll, and with a click I can unpause the game. Plus, like you can see, I've already got a lemming mining downwards. So I can confirm that this trackable works 100%. And just like the USB Microsoft optical mouse, this being optical as well, I will say that it feels nice to use. Even though, dare I admit, I still prefer and find it easier to use a mouse over a trackable like this. but that's just me. So I would love to hear what you think of them in the comment section below. Anyway, looking back at the screen, it seems like all of the Lemmings are about to get to safety. So it seems like we'll be testing the final mouse on level 2. And it's the one you have all been waiting for. Yes, this PS2 bikini mouse. So let's get that plugged in now. And if we just start the next level, oh no, I forgot that this is the level that requires me parachuting all 10 Lemmings to safety. So, sorry Lemmings, I think I can only save the one of you. There we go. As I need to move on to tell you about this mouse, which, as suspected, as it is a PS2 one, and despite how crazy it looks, it does work pretty flawlessly. And for those wondering where I got this from, where else could you buy something like this? Yeah, eBay, of course. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this little test of various mice and trackables, through which I think the takeaway is that older PS2 mice and the USB ones that can switch back to the older PS2 protocol work fine with this adapter. However, newer USB devices like that Kensington trackable will not, due to not supporting the older PS2 protocol. Anyway, wrapping things up, hopefully the takeaway from today's build shows that if you are missing a mouse when you find an Amiga, or if your original one is no longer working and cannot be fixed, there is a great community out there making and sharing projects like the adapter I built today that allows you to use more widely available replacements. So thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to smash that like button, and if you are not subscribed, then subscribe so you don't miss the next video. And talking of videos, as we are now near the end of this one, I can't think of a better time to say a big thank you to all those that support the channel, both new and old, here on YouTube through memberships, over on Patreon, and through Buy Me a Coffee. And for those interested in finding out what extra perks my YouTube members and Patreon members get, you're going to find links to both of them over in the video description. And talking of perks, a massive thank you goes out to both my Patreon Silver and Gold members for their amazing extra support, whose names you can see here on the screen, especially Banesh Banerjee, Jeremy, Peter Broderson, and Position Lost. Likewise, all you Patreon Bronze members and YouTube VIP members will be able to see your names immortalised in the end scroll at the end of this video. Anyway, that's all for today, and as it is loaded, I can't resist playing some more Lemmings. So I'm off to do that now, and I'll see you next time.
Let's go!